They tried to drag you through the mud, thought if they piled on enough shame, you'd break. That's the thing about people like them, those who thrive on guilt and humiliation. They bank on your silence, on your hesitation to fight back. Shame, after all, is their favorite tool. It's quiet, insidious, and cuts deeper than any insult. But what they never anticipated was your ability to rise above it, to hold your head high and walk through their storm of judgment without a second glance. And now, while you stand, unbothered, unshaken, they're left with the bitter taste of their own failure. Shame only works when it finds a willing host. It feeds on your insecurities, burrows into the cracks in your confidence. They expected you to internalize their words, to carry the weight of their accusations like a badge of dishonor. But you didn't. You saw through their game, recognized their desperate need to feel powerful, and instead of bowing to their manipulations, you threw their shame back at them, leaving them to sit in the mess they created. They tried to weaponize your imperfections, twisting them into a narrative that suited their agenda. But here's the catch. Your flaws aren't weaknesses. They're proof of your humanity, your growth, your resilience. While they wasted their energy trying to tarnish your reputation, you embraced your imperfections, turned them into lessons, into strengths. And that's what truly shattered their control. How can shame work on someone who refuses to be ashamed? What they didn't realize is that shame is a double-edged sword. The harder they swung it, the deeper it cut into their own psyche. Every word they used to tear you down became a reminder of their own insecurities, their own unresolved battles. They thought they were attacking you, but in reality, they were exposing themselves. And now, as they sit in the aftermath of their failed attempts, they're haunted by the shame they tried to impose on you. Shame isn't just a tool, it's a mirror. It reflects the intentions of those who wield it. And in their efforts to degrade you, they revealed the cracks in their own character. The louder their accusations, the more obvious their weaknesses became. They wanted to paint you as the villain, but their brushstrokes were sloppy, their colors mismatched. And now, the only image left on the canvas is their own, distorted and incomplete. Your silence was deafening. Not the silence of submission, but the silence of strength. While they hurled their accusations, you gave them nothing to latch onto. No defense, no argument, no plea for understanding. Just quiet, unyielding confidence. That silence became a void they couldn't fill, a space where their words lost all meaning. And in that void, their shame began to grow, taking root in the very soil they thought they'd prepared for you. People who use shame as a weapon do so because they lack the courage to face their own truths. They project their fears, their insecurities, their failures onto others, hoping to lighten their own burden. But shame doesn't dissipate when shared. It multiplies, and the weight of it has a way of circling back, landing squarely on the shoulders of those who threw it. Now, as you rise above their chaos, they're left to carry the load they tried to place on you. The beauty of overcoming shame is that it transforms you. What once felt like chains becomes your armor, your strength, your shield. Their words, their judgments, their attempts to break you, all of it becomes fuel for your growth. And while they wallow in the shame they created, you move forward, untouchable, unstoppable. Their failure isn't just in their inability to shame you, it's in their inability to see how much stronger they've made you. They wanted you to feel small, But instead, they made you larger than life. They tried to silence you, but your resilience became louder than their accusations. They thought shame would destroy you, but all it did was build you up. And now, as they sit in their shame, watching you thrive, they're left to wonder how they ever thought they could control someone as unshakable as you. They wield shame like a weapon, not because they're strong, but because they're fragile. Their attempts to degrade you aren't acts of power, they're acts of fear, a desperate effort to mask their insecurities. But what they didn't count on was your emotional resilience. It's the fortress they can't breach, the mirror that reflects their own weaknesses. While they sought to break you, your unyielding strength left them exposed, vulnerable, and ashamed of the very tactics they once thought were invincible. Your resilience doesn't just protect you, it reveals them. It shines a light on their fragile egos, their desperate need for validation. Every insult they hurled, every attempt to undermine you, was a projection of their own internal battles. They degrade others to feel bigger, stronger, more in control. But when their words hit the wall of your resilience and fall to the ground, it forces them to confront a painful truth. Their power was an illusion. Emotional resilience isn't loud. It's quiet, steady, and undeniable. It doesn't engage with their games or react to their provocations. Instead, it absorbs the blows and stands firm, unshaken by their chaos. They wanted a reaction, a sign that their words had landed. But your calm, your poise, left them floundering. Their attempts to assert dominance only highlighted their own lack of it. Their fragility is betrayed by their need to tear others down. Strong people don't shame, they uplift. They don't need to step on others to feel tall because they've built their strength from within. But those who shame, they're clinging to a house of cards, hoping no one notices how easily it could collapse. And your resilience? It was the gust of wind that brought their illusion crumbling down. They wanted to see you falter, to watch you question yourself, to feel the satisfaction of their superiority. But instead, they found themselves questioning their own tactics, their own motives, their own worth. Your resilience didn't just withstand their attacks, it reflected their fragility back at them. And that's a weight they weren't prepared to carry. You didn't need to fight back with words or actions. Your resilience spoke for itself, louder than any argument ever could. It showed them that you are unbreakable, that their attempts to diminish you only made your strength more visible. And in the silence of their failed attempts, they were left to sit with the discomfort of their own inadequacies. Their shame was a shield, an attempt to protect themselves from their own self-doubt. But your resilience pierced through that shield, leaving them exposed. They tried to degrade you, but all they did was reveal the cracks in their own facade. And now, as you rise, unbothered and unapologetic, they're left with nothing but the weight of their own shame. Emotional resilience isn't just about surviving. It's about thriving in the face of adversity. It's the quiet strength that turns their insults into stepping stones, their doubts into fuel. While they sought to break you, you built yourself up. And now, your resilience stands as a reminder that their fragility was their greatest weakness, and your strength was your greatest weapon. Shame is a performance, and like any performance, it needs an audience. To thrive, they tried to cast you as the villain in their story, painting you with broad strokes of judgment. hoping others would join in their condemnation. Their power wasn't in the shame itself. It was in the collective validation they sought to create. But you denied them the one thing they needed most: your compliance. By owning your narrative, you stripped them of their audience, leaving them to face the hollowness of their accusations alone. When you own your story, shame loses its grip. They expected you to crumble, to bow your head, to shrink under the weight of their scrutiny. But instead, you stood tall, unflinching, unapologetic. You took control of the narrative they tried to twist, transforming it into a testament to your resilience. Their whispers turned into echoes, fading into irrelevance as you reclaimed your voice. And with each step you took forward, their need for validation turned inward, forcing them to confront their own insecurities. They sought to rally others against you, to turn their shame into a weapon of mass influence. But collective validation only works when the target plays along. By refusing to engage, by refusing to give their words power, you left them shouting into the void. The audience they craved dissipated, and with it, their sense of control. What they thought would elevate them only served to isolate them, leaving them exposed to the very judgment they had hoped to deflect onto you. Owning your narrative is a quiet rebellion, a refusal to let others define your worth. It's not about denying your imperfections. It's about embracing them. They wanted to use your flaws as evidence against you, but you turned those same flaws into proof of your humanity, your strength, your growth. And in doing so, you robbed them of their power, leaving them grasping at straws. Shame relies on collective agreement, on the idea that others will echo the accusations and reinforce the narrative. But you broke that cycle. You didn't need to argue, to defend, to prove them wrong. Your presence, your confidence, your refusal to shrink in the face of their attempts was enough. And as their accusations fell flat, their own credibility began to crumble. Their game was always about control, about silencing you, about making you question yourself. But by owning your narrative, you turned the tables. You spoke your truth, not to them, but to yourself. And in doing so, you built a shield they couldn't penetrate. They wanted an audience, but all they found was a mirror. As they stood there, waiting for validation that never came, they were forced to confront the emptiness of their actions. Their shame, which they had tried to project onto you, boomeranged back, magnified by their failed attempts to control the narrative. And now, they're left standing in the very spotlight they had hoped to place you under. Owning your narrative isn't just about silencing shame. It's about transforming it. It's about taking the power they tried to steal from you and using it to fuel your growth. They wanted to see you falter, but instead, they watched as you rose, stronger, louder, more unapologetically yourself. And in that rise, their attempts to shame you became nothing more than a footnote in your story. Shame is loud, abrasive, and fleeting. It relies on spectacle, on immediate impact, to achieve its goal. But dignity is quiet, unshakable, and enduring. They underestimated how powerful your dignity could be. Their attacks, designed to humiliate you, bounced off the walls of your self-respect and fell to the ground. They didn't understand that while shame burns fast and hot, dignity is a slow, burning flame, impossible to extinguish. And now, as the embers of their cruelty fade, your quiet strength remains, an unyielding testament to who you truly are. They wanted you to lose your composure, to react, to sink to their level. But dignity isn't about matching energy. It's about standing firm in your values, even when others try to pull you down. Their attacks revealed their own insecurities more than anything about you. Every insult, every attempt to degrade you, was a reflection of their internal chaos. And your refusal to engage with their noise made them painfully aware of the gap between their pettiness and your integrity. Dignity doesn't fight back. It doesn't have to. It holds its ground, steady and unwavering, while the storm rages around it. They threw their worst at you, hoping to see you crack, but your composure only magnified their desperation. Their attempts to shame you turned into a spotlight on their own lack of character, while your quiet strength spoke louder than any words ever could. Their shame was loud because it needed to be. It relied on shock and volume to draw attention, to create a ripple effect. But dignity doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need validation. It exists independently, rooted in self-awareness and self-respect. And that independence is what makes it so powerful. While they scrambled to make a scene, you stood still, a fortress of calm in the chaos they created. What they didn't realize is that dignity has a way of exposing weakness. Their attacks, loud and frantic, began to feel hollow in the face of your silence. The more they tried to provoke you, the more obvious it became that their actions were driven by fear, by insecurity, by the need to assert control. And in the end, their shame became their burden to carry, while you walked away untouched. Your dignity wasn't just a shield, it was a mirror. It reflected their behavior back at them, forcing them to confront the ugliness of their actions. While they wanted to drag you into their chaos, you forced them to see themselves for who they truly were. And that realization, more than anything, was what left them ashamed. Their attacks didn't diminish you. They revealed them. Dignity doesn't react because it doesn't need to prove anything. Your worth isn't tied to their opinion, their accusations, or their attempts to control the narrative. And every time you held your ground, every time you chose silence over retaliation, you reminded them of that. Their words lost their sting, their actions lost their impact, and their need to degrade you turned into a burden they couldn't carry. They underestimated the strength it takes to remain dignified in the face of shame. They thought you'd crumble, but instead, you rose. And now, as they sit with the weight of their own actions, you walk forward, unburdened, unbroken, and undeniably stronger. Their fleeting attacks are nothing more than echoes in the distance, while your dignity remains, a constant reminder of your quiet power. Shame feeds on ignorance, on the shadows where self-doubt festers and thrives. It whispers lies, twisting your perception of yourself until you believe that your flaws define you. They tried to weaponize it against you, counting on your silence and your uncertainty to give it strength. But shame is a parasite, and the moment you shine the light of self-awareness on it, it withers. You recognized it for what it was, a reflection of their own insecurities. And in doing so, you robbed it of its power. Their attempts to shame you were never about your mistakes or imperfections. They were about control. They wanted you to feel small so they could feel larger, to plant seeds of doubt so they could manipulate you. But self-awareness is the antidote to shame. It teaches you that your value isn't determined by their opinions or accusations. You stopped internalizing their words and started seeing them as a projection of their own struggles. And that shift dismantled their entire strategy. Shame thrives on secrecy, on the things we hide from ourselves and others. They tried to exploit those hidden corners of your mind, but self-awareness turned them into open spaces. You began to own your story, flaws and all, refusing to let their judgment dictate your narrative. When you acknowledged your imperfections without judgment, you took away their ability to use them against you. Shame, stripped of its mystery, became nothing more than an empty threat. Self-awareness doesn't just neutralize shame, it transforms it. What once felt like a weight on your shoulders becomes a stepping stone to growth. You saw their attempts for what they were, a desperate bid to make you doubt yourself. But instead of crumbling, you used their attacks as fuel, a reminder of your strength and resilience. Every attempt to shame you only made you more aware of your own worth. They relied on shame to silence you, to keep you from stepping into your power. But self-awareness gave you a voice, a clarity that couldn't be drowned out. You began to see the patterns, the way their words were designed to manipulate rather than reflect reality. And once you understood their tactics, they lost their hold on you. Their shame became noise, a hollow echo that no longer carried any weight. Shame is rooted in fear, fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of being seen. But self-awareness is rooted in courage. It's the willingness to face yourself, to embrace your flaws, to acknowledge your mistakes without letting them define you. While they hid behind their accusations, you stood in the light, unafraid to be seen. And that courage left them powerless, scrambling to regain control of a game they no longer understood. Their shame turned inward the moment they realized it couldn't touch you. They saw you rise above their attempts, their words bouncing off the armor of your self-awareness. And in that moment, they were forced to confront their own fears, their own insecurities. Their weapon backfired, leaving them to deal with the very emotions they had tried to impose on you. Self-awareness is the ultimate act of defiance against shame. It says, I see myself clearly, and I refuse to be defined by your judgment. They wanted to make you feel small, but your self-awareness made you untouchable. You became a mirror, reflecting their insecurities back at them, forcing them to see the emptiness of their actions. And in that reflection, they found shame, not in you, but in themselves. Shame is a trap, but not for the one it's aimed at. It's a snare that often catches the instigator, leaving them entangled in the very emotions they sought to impose on someone else. When they tried to shame you, they weren't expecting a backlash. They assumed their words would land with precision, cutting into your confidence. But what they failed to understand is that shame doesn't move in one direction. It has a way of circling back, amplifying the insecurities of the person who cast it. And now, they're left drowning in their own venom. Their intention was to weaken you, to make you question yourself, to dim your light so theirs would shine brighter. But shame has a funny way of rebounding. Every time they attempted to push you down, they revealed more about themselves than they did about you. Their words didn't diminish you. They exposed their own fragility, their desperate need for validation. While they tried to craft a narrative about your flaws, they inadvertently highlighted their own. The power of shame lies in its ability to linger, to create doubt that echoes long after the words have been spoken. But that power dissolves when it's met with resilience. You didn't just deflect their attempts, you absorbed them, turned them into lessons, and grew stronger. Each time they tried to provoke guilt or insecurity, You stood firm, watching as their frustration grew. The shame they intended for you began to weigh on them, a constant reminder of their failed attempts. Shame is a weapon wielded by those who lack the courage to face their own shortcomings. They thought that by focusing on you, they could deflect attention from themselves. But their tactics backfired, and the spotlight turned inward. Their own insecurities bubbled to the surface, undeniable and impossible to ignore. They wanted you to feel small, but their actions only made their own fears loom larger. What they didn't realize is that shame is a two-way street. When you meet it with dignity, with self-awareness, with calm, it has nowhere to go but back to its source. Your refusal to engage left them grappling with the weight of their own intentions, leaving them to sit in the very darkness they tried to cast on you.